Welcome back, everyone, to another Hearts of Iron 4 mod spotlight, and obviously, you all know what this is. You all knew it was coming. You all still clicked on it, so good job. Now, in case you don't know, like the three of you, this is the New Order, Last Days of Europe. There's a peace windmill in Adolf Hitler, and it's 1962, and, you know, yeah, again, the Nazis, they're still here. 1962. So it's a mod where obviously Germany, quote unquote, won World War II. It's already come out in 2 iterations, 2 demos, really, where the world looked essentially like this already. But you had that only a few countries were actually playable, you know, with focus trees. One focused on sort of South Russia, Southern Siberia. Another one focused on Africa, with these four nice states. None of them at all just, you know, colonial hellholes. And yeah, this is the, well, not final, but, you know, full version with pretty much most countries with, most important countries, we should say, with focus trees. There's still a few exceptions, like Canada, like Brazil, like India, that still need focuses, and, well, quite a lot of ones need expanding. For example, some of the eastern colonies of Germany, the Reichskommissariats we're going to take a look at in a little bit, they don't have focuses yet, although they will in the future. Does Caucasian have one? No. So essentially, what is the premise of this? For the two of you who don't know, the Nazis, well, but basically, okay, so first of all, we should say that the developers don't really particularly care about the whole alternate history side of things when it comes to the lore, I suppose. Like, you know, the pre-story, they're like, yeah, that's, or at least the World War II part, which is obviously everyone's like, oh my god, the Nazis won the war because of this and this and that. They don't particularly care how, they particularly care about what happens after that. So essentially what happens with World War II, according to this alternate history, is that essentially everything that could have gone good for Germany goes good, and especially everything that could have gone bad for the Allies goes bad. Perfect storm, and the Germans eventually get nukes and nuke Washington, I think, or maybe New York. One of the two, and that results in a German victory, or, you know, at the very least, the appearance of one. Now, that's the basic premise. What follows is the much more interesting part, which is the 50s and now the 60s, which is when essentially it all goes bad for Germany because it's an overbloated, insane, sort of monolithic and thus not very flexible, not very, you know, creative hegemon. Now, Europe has been essentially, again, united under the hegemonic influence of Germany. Have never heard of this ever. Certainly never happened again. And only this time it's through military force. So obviously the German army, the Wehrmacht, and the German states supporting that Wehrmacht are like massively overextended. We can see the German faction, the Unity Pact. It's just all over the place. They've got, you know, African possessions. It's just a mess. It's just a total fucking mess for Germany to hold. Plus the German economy, which was essentially a war economy that was sort of revitalized thanks to, again, the ramping up of arms production, heavy debt spending from the state. Haha, never heard of that ever. And later on, obviously, plundering conquered countries. Obviously, this kind of economy does not do too well once, you know, the whole war business is over. So, wait, what the fuck? I don't think we need to do that. Okay. yeah, obviously this does not end up being too good once the wars are over. Plus, everyone who could ever hope to or want to oppose, you know, the genocidal Nazis does so. Now, in this timeline, they don't go like full on Holocaust and General Plan Ost, just because it's like literally impossible. So like they just do like in true Nazi fashion, they do pretty much try to do everything at once. There's Jews in Madagascar, so they did the whole Madagascar land, then they killed, you know, everyone in like Germany or whatever, and definitely Burgundy. And so they did a mini Holocaust and then a mini General Plan Ost, which was the Holocaust, but for the Slavs, essentially. But it's not nearly as extensive as in the dreams of, like, you know, the people who are like, yes, we must cleanse the whole of Europe or the whole of the world from the Jewish and the Untermenschen. So that's basically, you know, the premise. Then the Germans waste a whole bunch of resources on, like, you know, pet projects like the Atlantropa, which is a dam in Gibraltar that, you know, causes obviously the Mediterranean to half drain up, and so there's more land, but it's actually desert, so it's actually useless. Then there's the big Congo Lake. They dammed some river. What else? Well, I mean, again, they're like bombing like half the world for no reason. Like there's Luftwaffe terror bombing in most of Western Russia, just to, you know, quote unquote, prevent the Russians from ever forming, you know, truly viable states out of the rubble of the Soviet Union. And they're doing the same in like Africa for whatever reason. Like nobody really cares. They just like doing that shit. Do they also do it? No, they don't do it in South Africa. In general, it's just, you know, it's just a mess. It's just an overbloated, corrupt mess, and it's collapsing. So at some point, the Russians, or I should say the Soviets, under a rump Soviet Union called the West Russian Revolutionary Front, which encompasses like this, essentially attack into Muscovy, into the German-occupied Russia, and almost destroy almost destroy Germany. But you know, they also collapse into a million factions. And in the meantime, in Germany, you have an attempted coup by the SS under Himmler, who fails and is sort of exiled in Ordenstadt Gamer, or Burgundy. And that's basically the setup for the current situation. The United States has mostly recovered from some of the, you know, not so great things that happened to it. Oh, they nuked Pearl Harbor. Never mind. They nuked Pearl Harbor, which is also now Japanese territory, the Hawaiian Islands. And also the Japanese have a treaty port, I suppose, in Los Angeles, because why the fuck not? So yeah, America is not really in its greatest state, but it's definitely millions of times more powerful potentially than the German Reich, which is massively overextended. Japan, the other great power in the world, so this is like the free power dichotomy. It's not like in the real life Cold War, the United States, the Soviet Union, and, you know, kind of China. It's the United States, Germany, and Japan. Now, Japan in and of itself is not like able to stand up to the United States, but it's got the massive co-prosperity sphere, you know, sort of feeding it. And so, yeah, the co-prosperity sphere and, you know, sort of the power of the Japanese military make Japan seem like a very, very strong player on the world stage, which it certainly is in Asia. It's a Asian hegemon, although it's got its own problems that we're going to take a look at in a little bit. So that's basically the premise. There's this freeway Cold War. Obviously, the alliance between Germany and Japan collapsed basically almost as soon as the war was over because, you know, it was an alliance of convenience, and they, you know, now are better rivals, you know, a bit like the United States and the USSR IRL. So that's about it. Now, the mod in and of itself, basically is organized on the principle of essentially almost being like a visual novel in Hearts of Iron 4 fashion. So the thing that's important is a bit like in a lot of RPGs, it's like how the story progresses, like the focus trees sort of tell a story. We can start a nuclear war, epic. And essentially, the gameplay is supposed to revolve around that. So like the actual gameplay of fighting wars and, you know, building up production and armies and all that is sort of secondary to the nation building aspects of the focus trees, which a lot of people don't particularly love. Also, I love how I love how the societal development of Germany is going down. So not a lot of people like particularly love that, but it's basically the way it is. Now, there's a few unique mechanics for some countries. Like the Germans have the militarists, which essentially is like, you know, the influence of the army. I believe Japan also has a sort of thing like that. Let me see. Let me see about the Japanese. It's, of course, going to take a while to switch over. The Japanese do have the Japanese government GUI, so they have a little political screen where essentially all their factions interact, which we're going to take a look at in more depth in a little bit. And the United States also, I believe, have the Congress, obviously. Let me see. There we go. The United States government, the Senate is controlled by the Republican Democrat Party. Yes, the Republican Democrat Party. Okay, so you can see like where all the states are voting. Epic. So essentially, let's stay as the United States. Essentially, again, most major countries have focuses, but we're going to take a look at that later. First, there's a few things of note. There's a new sort of law system, which is pretty close to what a lot of mods like End of a New Beginning end up doing. It's of course very, very heavily inspired by Victoria 2. Victoria 2 originally was supposed to be the game this mod was being hosted on. So obviously you have things like multi-party democracy or one-party state. You have your secularism, your state religion, your trade unions, your immigration / no immigration, slavery, public meetings, you know, there's free press, voting, elite voting, and refugees, which I love how refugees and migration is different. Then you have military laws, obviously your conscription, your, are the women's allowed to do things? Military policing, which can be either you're a gamer or you're a libtard. The trading, you know, either, again, independent gamer state or, like, actual organized military. Racial integration, of course. Wow, America has an integrated military. Interesting. That's epic. Good job, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, BLM confirmed. So, and then the draft exemptions, you know, religious deferments and stuff like that. Then there's obviously so that was the political and military. Then there's economic, social, and the societal development, which is kind of cool. Now, economic and social, you know what's going on here. You can pause and read, you know, everything. But like, are women people? Like, you know, do you want people to know how to read? Do you want people to not die of preventable diseases? All those kinds. Do you want the police? All those things. Do you want people to die working? That basically those usual stuffs. And then there's obviously the academic. Sorry, the academic base. There's societal one, which is pretty epic because it's a thing that works with trends. So essentially, like, if you do things in your focus tree or in your decisions, again, and in these kinds of things, if you do things that are gonna help your country develop, you're gonna get bonuses, and it's gonna take a while for that to happen. You cannot just like click a 60-day focus and expect to like education good now. like, it takes time to, grow. And obviously this mod is meant to be played in a long period of time. I believe right now, the period of time that's supported by content is like 10 years. But it's going to increase as development sort of happens. I believe the end goal is 30 years, although that's like the sort of the time frame that they were heading for at the beginning as a sort of goal is 20 years. Then 30 years would be the ideal sort of continuation. So all the way to the late 80s, to the end of the, I guess, historical Cold War. And yeah, so you have your academic base, which is like, do people know how to research things? Your research facilities are, your country's facilities helping people research things. Agricultural methods, does 90% of your population still need to work in agriculture, or everyone starves to death? Poverty rate, haha, funny. Poverty clearly isn't real. We clearly live in the best society possible. And, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Industrial equipment is obviously, are you going to cut your own hand just to, like, do industrial production, or is robot doing it for you? Epic robot. I worship the robot every day and all that. Industrial expertise is, do your people know how to engineer? Army professionalism, pretty obvious. And do you know how to nuke people? Which is always a pretty nice thing. It's got an annual cost, and you can end the world. Now there's obviously the nuke mechanics. So this mod disables the justify war goal decision. In fact, there's a lot of, like, most diplomacy through, like, the actual diplomatic screen has been disabled. Most, or if not all, diplomacy happens through focuses. And if you actually get into a war with, like, let's say Germany as the United States, someone's gonna click this button. So, country is the United States, the Greater German Reich, the Empire of Japan, Ordenstadt Burgund, India, the Italian Empire. These potentially nuclear capable countries. If these are at war with each other, you can basically do a game over. And I'm not, like, the biggest fan of this, but whatever. It's a creative decision. Wait. I love how there's a ton of random American ships just, like, roaming in the Pacific. Nice. Very, very nice. We're near Hawaii. Yeah, there's supposed to be a Hawaiian missile crisis at some point, so... Wait, are they trying to head to Australia? Interesting. So that's that. There's obviously a new tech tree because, we're in the 60s. And as you can see, it goes up all the way to the 1980s because that's where the game kind of wants to go. And obviously there's this whole new UI, which right now is readable. It used to not be readable, but now it is. And so now it looks actually pretty good. Like, it's all blueprint kind of things. Obviously there's new stuff like the obviously the ATGMs, nothing you wouldn't expect from a Cold War based mod, based, and helicopters, the main battle tanks, all these good things. The artillery is pretty much the same. Land Doctrine is this thing. Looks to be pretty much similar to, the usual sort of modern day doctrines things. One is the maneuver thing. One is like the Airland kind of battle. Although this is, I suppose, like the grand battle plan, and this is the Airland battle kind of thing. Obviously, new Navy stuff, but like that's the importance of this is relative. Big, cool, epic helicopters, big, cool, epic jets, and, aircraft. It's unfortunately not... This is pretty good. Oh, wow. Nighthawks. Nice. This is not, unfortunately, as like well developed as, for example, Cold War Iron Current, in my opinion. But you know, it does its duty. It's fine. We don't particularly care. And there's also a economy screen where you can make the money printer go burr, or you can decrease the spendings, you know, and get austerity, and everyone's mad. So obviously this ties into budget mechanics, GDP, all these things that become important if you play like the United States of America or countries with like a real economy. Obviously, there's a lot of countries without a real economy, such as, I don't know, Irkutsk. But, you know, it's a nice addition. Yeah, you can go into bankruptcy if you're, like, you know, not careful. The intelligence agency, I love the CIA. The intelligence agency is pretty much the same as in base HOI4, so there's nothing really to see here. And so we get to like the main meat of the mod 20 minutes in. It's obviously like the focus trees. So we're gonna just very, very quickly go over sort of what's going on in the major countries, which is sort of a lore thing. But again, it's what most of the gameplay and like minute to minute is gonna be focused on. I love how some of these are actually completed right at the start. Yeah, Nixon got his hands dirty. Everyone I don't like is Hitler. And, yeah, you know, America is essentially divided between two major parties, the Republican Democrats. Yes, the Republican Democrats, obviously, which have a more conservative wing, which are more closely aligned to the old Democrats. Sort of the Dixiecrats, which used to be essentially like at some point the American parties switched. The Republicans used to be more liberal, and the Democrats more conservative. It switched around. Essentially, the first person to really do this was FDR, who, even though he was a Democrat, pushed for very, very social democratic policies. But, you know, in that moment, there was a weird, like, kind of horseshoe thing going on within the Democratic Party, where essentially the Southern Democrats, or the Dixiecrats, were, like, super ultra-conservative and, you know, for segregation and all those nice things. Okay, of course. All those nice things. So, like, they were even more conservative than the conservative Republicans, who were just kind of like liberal conservatives, and the rest of the Republicans who were, again, like the party of Abraham Lincoln at that point, who were like, quote-unquote, classical liberals, or whatever the fuck kind of name you want to use. In this timeline, obviously, because of the whole, you know, Nazi thing, there's an electoral unity between the Republicans and the Democrats against something called the New People's Party, the NPP. And the New People's Party, or the NPP, is even more crazy and horseshoe because it's got a centrist wing, which is Social Democrats, a far-right wing, which is essentially like our timeline's first, like, segregationist, radical right Republican kind of people, which is when the American Party split, which first really began with, like, Nixon, with the Republican Party turning to the right, you have that, the Republicans go for something called the Southern Strategy, which is, like, let's grab the sort of rural, you know, white Southern vote on, like, socially conservative issues, on, you know, religion, abortion, you know, all these things where, like, rural white voters are gonna be more, you know, in favor of a conservative agenda. It's more complicated than that, and in the cities we're gonna, like, support big business and so go after, like, richer strata of society, and it basically continues all the way to today, and, you know, you can see it pretty clearly in even the latest elections. While you leave the sort of urban, sort of lower middle class vote to the Democrats, especially vote that's going to be looking for things like more welfare and stuff like that. Well, our voters are going to be looking for tax cuts or something like that. Essentially in this, you have this sort of welfare nationalism that was abandoned by the Republicans is then even more embraced by the MPP. So you have a wing that's super welfare-y. You have another wing that's like far left, but it's less prevalent at the start of the game. And then you have another wing that's far right. So it's this massive horseshoe theory, Nazbol, what the fuck is going on? I don't even know. You know, Big Tent, who basically they just hate the only reason why the MPP really exists is that they hate the Republican Democrats. And the only real reason that the Republican Democrats exist is because they hate the MPP. A bit like how in real life the only reason the Democrats exist is that they hate the Republicans, and the only reason the Republicans exist is that they hate the Democrats. It's basically that, except everyone's more extreme. So, do we have a better understanding of what's going on? No. There's the whole civil rights thing going on. It's obviously like the early 60s. Nationwide riots reinforce the police. Never heard of that one before. They have a dream. The civil rights issue has intensified. So you can still come down and either agree to, you know, more civil rights and do the Civil Rights Act, which is obviously a pretty important historical milestone for America. And or you can do crackdown with Nixon and be like, veto it. In which case you support the segregationists, you know, Wallace and all those good people. So that's basically the early American political tree. Then you're going to have general elections in November, I believe, of what year? Jesus Christ. So they have them 80, 40, 20. Yeah, it should be 1964, I think. Not 100% sure on that. Let's see. I'm always pretty bad with American elections in, like, because they do them every 4 years, so, you know. Yeah, 1964 United States presidential elections. President Lyndon B. Johnson defeated Goldwater. Oh, Goldwater, right? It was the whole Vietnam thing. Ah, right, okay. I remember that. It was after the, you know, haha funny, you know, CIA, totally conspiracy theory killed JFK. Right. So yeah, that's America. They've got the problem of civil rights. They've got the problem of essentially North-South divide and sort of the social economic condition of a lot of Americans who are getting wealthier but not wealthy enough. And they've got obviously got the foreign policy issue of the Nazis and the Japanese. Now, America leads a faction called the OFN, which is the Organization of Free Nations, which includes, you know, a few countries like Guyana, you know, epic, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and yeah, pretty much that. US-occupied Iceland, of course. And a few other random shit countries all over the place. And the UFN does have like a meter where it can be like more united or less united. South Africa is going to join the UFN pretty quickly. And the UFN is sort of like small NATO. So that's basically what's going on. And they've got a lot of options to sort of undermine the spheres of both Japan and Germany. Especially with Germany, we're talking about South Africa, so to sort of get the Germans out of Africa. And then in the European continent, you have some decisions with, you know, England, Norway, Brittany, all the sort of German puppet states. With the co-prosperity sphere, again, you've got some possible, friends all over. Indonesian rebel groups, support to India, all that kind of stuff. India is obviously divided in two, in case you don't know. One of them is like historical India under Nehru and the Indian National Congress, but you know the other half is, haha, the funny fascism. sort of Nazbol Azad Hind, Indian nationalists who just kind of hated the British enough to side with the Japanese. They were actually like not that bad, funnily enough, but whatever. So that's America in a nutshell. Then I suppose we're gonna go take a look at Japan, because there's less to talk about with Japan than with Germany. Japan, essentially what's going on here is that there's the insane and absolutely like pointless political infighting of a shitload of different factions. Well, to be more fair, 5. There's essentially the conservatives under Ino Hiroya, who just kind of want things to continue the way that they have been. There's the reformists under Kaya, who want to reform the Japanese economy. Then there's the liberals, who are actually like also reformist under Takagi, who want liberalization of the political sphere. There's the Kidoites, who I believe are essentially kind of a bureaucratic, pro-bureaucratic faction. It's been a while since I've read the Japanese Dev Diary. Yeah, I think they're supposed to be kind of a more pro-big business kind of faction, pro-bureaucracy and all that. And where the fuck is the thing? Then there's the independents who, you know, they're centrists, and so they don't matter. And discredit faction, launch slander campaign, and all those things. So that's basically Japan, and the sort of way these factions are going to interact with each other is that, you know, Japan, great epic economy, just like in real life and around this time, except, well, in real life and around this time, it was basically getting rich off of what China became famous for doing in like the 90s, which is like, you know, relatively low added value, low labor-intensive industrial manufacturing. So it was exporting like a, you know, like a motherfucker essentially, which then allowed it to become also a financial powerhouse and start, you know, becoming a strong economy again. Then the 90s happened. Blah blah blah. Japan's complicated. Let's not get into it. There was a time, like the 1980s, where some people thought that Japan was going to overtake America as like the greatest, like the biggest economy in the world, and like, you know, there was going to be a new great sort of Pacific War between Japan and the United States. Obviously, that did not happen, probably because of China rather than because of Japan. But you know, that's another business, and we're not going to get into it. In this timeline, the Japanese are massively rich because they took over all of Asia. Except they took over all of Asia. There's Japanese troops all over the place. The Japanese economy is shady as fuck. Like, you know, Japan is no one to fear, of course, definitely. And we're going to ensure continued prosperity. The riches are continuing. We're just like so great. We solved everything. We definitely... wait. Fudge the numbers. Lobbying. The post-war is over. Japan is now healed of the wounds. Japan's economy explodes in like the first few months. There's a massive sort of financial crisis that's, you know, essentially resulting from a bunch of shady dealings between some Japanese zaibatsu, which are essentially like big giant conglomerates. Who, you know, produce everything and, you know, do everything, and that's, yeah. And, you know, they've been doing shady dealings, they've been doing sort of unregulated spending that has bloated the sort of stock market, and so when, you know, when a few pieces of the puzzle start to sort of tumble, when a few of the cards start to tumble, the entire thing starts to come down. Again, never heard of this ever before. Cough, cough, 2008, cough, 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 every crisis in, like, you know, modern history, cough, cough. And of course, that leads to consequences for both like Japan's internal politics, where, you know, at the beginning the conservatives are leading, but, you know, different factions can take over and sort of, you know, assassinate each other, gain the favor of the emperor, all those kinds of things. Gain the favor of the navy, the army, blah, 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 do politicking, die, and, you know, lead Japan to maybe glory, most likely financial ruin and the destruction of the Japanese empire. But it also has consequences on the Japanese sphere, which we're going to take a look at in a little bit, because it's actually a lot more interesting than the OFN sphere. Actually, let's do this right away. So obviously, that's basically most of Asia. The two most important states are Indonesia, which essentially is all about dealing with the relationship between Sukarno, who is the current, like, sort of quote-unquote dictator of Indonesia. And he's trying to sort of, you know, be a nationalist leader and reform Indonesia to be more independent of Japan and the Japanese and, you know, his internal enemies. And the Republic of China, which is under the reorganized government, the reorganized Nanjing government, which is what essentially these guys are the descendants of Wang Jingwei, the left KMT. I could speak probably for like hours about this, so let's not get into it. They're essentially Japanese collaborationists within the Nationalist Party. They're still technically the Nationalist Party, although they're not the same Nationalist Party as, like, you know, Chiang Kai-shek and all that. So these are people who basically believe that Japan couldn't be opposed at the moment, and so China had to collaborate with the Japanese, even in a subservient state, to survive as a country. And in the meantime, they're essentially trying to modernize China with the so-called 5 modernizations, which are a reference to a real-life political and economic campaign by first Zhou Enlai and then later Deng Xiaoping, who are two important Chinese leaders of the later 20th century, although they had 4 modernizations instead of 5. But basically, you know, China's trying to modernize. What they're telling the Japanese is, like, we're modernizing to be more integrated with the co-prosperity sphere and contribute to more. What they actually want to do is, you know, become strong and kick the Japanese out because, you know, they're the Japanese devils and all that. Epic. Unfortunately, the final showdown with the Japanese is sort of not coded into the game yet. So, yeah. And then finally, we have Germany. And it's hilarious puppets. The most hilarious of which is Burgundy, which is the only one that we have time to look at. But essentially, if you're not playing as Burgundy, everything that Burgundy does has strenge geheim, which is like, you know, missing string or unreadable string. Because, haha, they're secretive. They're like 1984, you know, cringe. Total fucking edgy, even more Nazi than the Nazis. And they want to build nukes to obliterate all of civilization because it's like Jewish. And they're going to build bunkers under which the Aryans are going to survive the nuclear holocaust. And then once it's over, they're going to emerge from the vaults and reclaim the world for pure Aryan master race. That's literally their ideology. It's obviously like a big meme, but, you know, they're like the main sort of antagonist of everyone. Even Germany. Like, again, these guys are more Nazi than the Nazis. So the German Nazi people, peace windmills, the people who don't like the Jews, this focus tree doesn't matter. Hitler dies in... spoilers. Hitler dies, or he's going to die pretty soon. Boomer Hitler is going to die in like a year and a half. And after that, the real German playthrough begins because there's a massive German civil war between 4 factions. One of them are the SS, favorable, obviously, to Ordenstadt Gamer under Reinhard Heydrich. You know, the person who, you know, was killing everyone in Czechoslovakia and then he got assassinated. That's one. faction, the SS. Then the other faction is like, you know, the German militarists under Goering, who want to sort of go back to the good old days of like the war economy. Then there's the conservatives under Bormann, who is the current head of government and sort of Hitler's second in command, who just kind of want things to stay the way they are. Which is an obviously bad idea, but they, you know, they're like the Brezhnev people, you know, Brezhnev in real life Soviet Union. Yeah, they're those kinds of people. So they're like, you know, again, Boomer Goering wanting to go back to the good old days of like killing everyone, while Boomer Bormann wants to, you know, just wants to have like a beer, you know, in Germania, in the Großgermanisches Reich. You know, he just wants to have a beer for God's sake, and he doesn't want any of that, any of this talk about like fucking, I don't know, Burgundy nukes, reforming, you know, the economy, and like reestablishing the Wehrmacht in the East. We just want things to continue the way they are. And Albert Speer, who is the, you know, Minister of the Economy, the Minister of War Production, who wants to sort of he's the fascist reformist who you know, he's like the Gorbachev of the situation. He's okay with the system. He wants Germany to still be great, but he has some ideas as to, you know, how that could be better achieved than what is going on right now. Of course, in real life, it didn't go all that well for Gorbachev. It might not go all that well for Speer in this timeline. And obviously, you know, there's all the German puppets. England has a pretty interesting storyline, sort of, because they have a guerrilla war going on of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, and you can play as them and liberate England from the Fash. Then there's Ostland, which is like, you know, it's having like Germanization happening, but it's insane, and there can be like a massive civil war that results from, or that is like sort of spawned by the collapse of Germany. And like in general, the collapse of Germany causes civil wars throughout basically the entirety of the German sphere. Also Poland under the general government, which is like, yeah, we're definitely like totally like Germany, and like, you know, there's no Poles left Lamau, but actually, you know, the Polish home army, the Polish resistance is still around. Ukraine can become its own republic. It can have civil wars. Muscovy can break apart into like, Muscovy can have like a basically like Israel-Palestine kind of thing, because there's some parts of Muscovy that are like Germanized, like, you know, Brauchitstadt. But the vast majority is still obviously Russian, ethnically Russian, and can become its own ethnic republic. And obviously, you know, there's the Italian Empire, which is the head of a smaller faction called the Triumvirate, which collapses almost instantly. Italy has a conflict between fascism and, well, like fascism, and which is headed by a guy called Scorza, which right now we cannot see, or the reformist fascists under Galeazzo Ciano, who want to sort of, you know, reform the Italian political sort of scene, and eventually it goes back into democracy, which goes into essentially like real life Italy in the Cold War, which is insane, because Italy in the Cold War in this period was fucking nuts. Like, you know, placing bombs everywhere to like make people vote what you want, kind of nuts. Yeah, that's about it. Obviously, the other big part is Russia. Russia's fragmented into a million warlords, but I'm gonna shoo you right off into my Russian warlords videos. One of them explains most of them, except some of them are changed, and it's the first. Like the first one explains pretty much most things, and it's got like fancy graphics and shit. And And then there's a second one that deals with the updates and changes that they have made. But essentially, like, the most interesting factions are West Russian Revolutionary Front, which is Soviet Union 2, to put it very, very simply, even though it's more complicated than that. There's Samara, which is Vlasov, who was a real-life German pro-German collaborationist. Then there's Vyatka, which is a Tsarist restoration attempt. There's the Aryan Brotherhood, which are German fanboys. There's Sverdlovsk, which is a Red Army faction. Tyumen, who are Stalin LARPers. They just love Stalin a lot, even though Stalin in this timeline was not the leader of the Soviet Union in the 20s and 30s, or in the later 20s and 30s. There's Magnitogorsk, which is a crazy, insane research lab / factory state under a person who did not believe that Darwin, had some great ideas. He thought that Darwin was pretty retarded. And they can try to create super soldiers, quote unquote. Yeah, in general, like, this is a pretty epic faction. Play it. It's the best faction ever. What else? Well, there's Tomsk, which is a liberal Russian republic. Omsk, which is insane. Please go watch my stream. Kemerovo, which is an attempt to restore the old Rurikid dynasty of the Rus before, Russia was even a thing. The Siberian Black Army, who are Makhnovist kind of anarchists, in the vein of the, Ukrainian free territory. Buryatia, which is a libertarian socialist Soviet Union. Pretty epic. Led by a guy who in real life basically tried to coup the Soviet Union in the early 80s by taking a frigate from like Riga harbor all the way to St. Petersburg and like try to broadcast a signal to start the Second Russian Revolution. And this was interpreted by Tom Clancy somehow as like Soviet submarine captain takes submarine and defects to the West. Yeah, not kidding. That's actually how the Hunt for Red October thing sort of started, how it was inspired. It was Valery Sablin, this person, trying to start a second Russian revolution, and overthrow the corrupt and sort of counter-revolutionary, as he saw it, Soviet Union of his time, and establish the true Soviet Union, loyal to the ideals of the October Revolution. For some reason, American boomer man who writes about military shit thinks, haha, I'm gonna make it a submarine captain and not a frigate captain, and I'm gonna make him escape to the West. And then I'm gonna make him be played by Sean Connery, which makes it a lot cooler, to be fair. And then there's the Amur, who you can see by their nice symbol of friendship and 10,000 years and peace on the earth, and the sort of the seasons following each other or whatever, and the sun revolving. Yeah, these people are Nazis. They're real-life Russian fascists. It's weird. I explained that further in the Russian warlords video. Go watch that. I'm now out of time. Thank you all for watching. Hope you've enjoyed. I'll put the link to the mod in the description in case somehow some of you have not heard of this yet. And yeah, hope to see you soon.